Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we continue our reading of Meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply value your support. Please like and share this audiobook to reach a wider audience, allowing more people to benefit from its wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ensuring you receive immediate notifications as we upload new content. Together, we can spread the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community of enlightenment and inner peace. Thank you for being part of our journey to make these profound teachings accessible to all. Let's start today with reading. Concentration Work. February 5, 2011. Ajahn Lee would always recommend starting out with 3 to 7 good long deep in and out breaths to highlight the process of breathing in the body and to give the body some energy. As the mind settles down, there's a tendency for the breath to get very subtle and quiet, and sometimes it's not really enough for the body's energy needs. Ajahn Fuang had a student one time who really liked the quiet breath. She would always go there in her meditation. I remember him criticizing her one night for that. He said, "You really have to read the body too. See what it needs right now. If you go just for the quiet breath all the time, it saps your strength." An essential skill in meditation is learning how to read what your body needs. Give it more energy when it needs more, even though that may not seem as quiet and refined as you'd like. You've got to take care of both the body and the mind. Consider the issue of directed thought and evaluation. Ajahn Lee recommended that you go through the body in quite a lot of detail to settle things down and to clear things up to create a good place where you can feel at home. People complain that it's not quieting to think about the breath and work with the breath energy in different parts of the body. Well, it's part of the work needed in order to get things ready to settle down in a way that will be solid and lasting. Be willing to do the work that's needed for a good solid concentration. Don't just go hiding out in a little quiet corner. Allowing your awareness to spread and fill the whole body is what gives you the proper foundation for your meditation. In doing this work, you exercise your faculties of mindfulness, alertness, and discernment. There's a tendency in some circles to encourage students talented in concentration to direct their energies in the direction of concentration. If they're more talented in the area of analyzing the mind, they're encouraged in the direction of discernment. Ajahn Fuang, though, would turn tables on people. If they were already talented in concentration, he'd have them work more in learning how to think about and analyze the movements of the mind. If they were already talented in analyzing things, he'd have them learn how to be quiet. Just sit with things for a while without predetermining all the time. This way, you learn how to detect when things are out of balance and to bring them back into balance when needed. There's work to be done. Ajahn Lee called it your concentration work. The directed thought and the evaluation. When you start out with these things, they can be rather coarse, but by exercising them, you learn how to bring them to refinement. Sometimes you find that refined breath is too weak. You're drifting off. You've got to strengthen things again, to get in touch with the body, and to gain a sense of how to listen to it and respond to its needs. This is especially difficult for people who have body issues, who basically want to run away and block out their awareness of the body. Learn how to trust the different sensations in the body and trust your ability to handle them. In the beginning, you may want to start with just one little familiar spot in the body or a spot that seems okay, and be willing to hang out there for a while. It may not seem impressive, it may not seem all that quiet yet, but you're working on potentials here. You're also working on patience, learning how to allow potentials to develop in a positive direction. One of the constant themes in the stories that we hear as children is that you can't judge things by their appearances. You certainly can't judge things now as to what they're going to be in the future. The ugly duckling that turns into a swan, the troll who has gold, the little mouse that's able to help the lion. You have to learn to look for potentials. The Buddha said to work with the potentials in the body and in the breath energy. Even though part of the mind may want to slip off into a nice little cocoon, where it doesn't have to think about anything, and doesn't have to deal with anything at all, that goes nowhere. You've got work to do. You've got to come back to the breath. Even though it may not seem comfortable or blissful to begin with, you're going to explore a potential. Give it some space. Don't push the breath too much. Don't force it too much. Just allow it to go into areas where it may not have gone before. Again, you're not trying to push or force things. The operative word is allow, allow, allow. Allow the breath to go down the back, allow it to go through the different organs in the torso, to go out your arms and out your legs. As you go through the body with the word allow, you begin to notice that some parts of the body are resistant. In some cases, the resistance is pretty short-lived. All you have to do is think, allow, and things begin to loosen up. Other times they won't loosen up so quickly. Just make a note to return to that area, and then continue to work through the parts that can connect into a feeling of free-flowing, mutually supportive energy among the different body parts, rather than working at cross purposes. Think of all the different organs in the body connecting up and strengthening one another. The energy in your left arm helps your right arm, and vice versa. Your right leg helps your left leg, and vice versa. As for the parts that don't want to join in yet, just leave them alone for the time being. It's like creating a union of different countries. Some countries are really recalcitrant. They'll wait to see how the union is going before they're willing to join. Look at the long term in order to develop things for the best results in the future, rather than for shutting things off for the quick fix in the cocoon. This type of outlook will lead to a greater sense of well-being, a greater sense of bliss. In the course of the Buddha's quest for awakening, he did attain formless levels of concentration that can be attained without dealing with the body at all. However, when the time came to settle on the true path, he started with a form of concentration that was very much with the body. Focusing on the breath, giving rise to a sense of ease and well-being, refreshment, and rapture. Then he worked the pleasure and rapture through the body in the same way that you knead moisture through dough. It's when your awareness is centered in the body like this that you open up areas that might be closed, to feel more at ease with areas that you've been running away from. At the same time, you're opening up areas of the mind that you might have closed off as well. A psychological test recently found that people who tend to go into deep concentration are very unaware of themselves psychologically. Of course, the test results didn't say what type of concentration those people were doing. There is a concentration that actually allows people to run away from the present moment, having no sense of the body at all. This type of concentration attracts people in denial or people who are ill at ease with their own bodies for one reason or another. It also doesn't yield much awareness or discernment. As a result, these types of people are not going to be very self-aware. Wrong concentration makes you unaware of yourself. In fact, it's often your unwillingness to be aware of yourself that drives you into that kind of wrong concentration to begin with. Right concentration requires that you be aware of the whole body and learn to feel at home in the body. This may take time as you get to know and trust things. It's like developing a friendship. You can't just walk up to somebody and immediately become deep and fast friends. There are some people you have an instant rapport with, but the friendship has to be tested over time for you to know whether that rapport will really grow into a friendship. There are some people for whom it's difficult in the beginning, but you find over time that they are people you can trust. That's a friendship worth cultivating in spite of whatever difficulties may be involved. So in the long run, the work involved in learning how to develop a friendship with concentration is good pleasurable work used for a higher end. We may want to come here just to tune out and relax for a bit. But for meditation to be genuinely relaxing with a sense of clarity, well-being, and strength requires work. It's like visiting the gym. If you want to come away feeling strong, you have to be willing to exercise. Here, the work or exercise is directed thought and evaluation around the breath. Establish a beachhead in the body, an area of the body where you feel at ease and confident. Then learn how to expand from there, listening to the needs of the body. Does it need deep breathing? Does it need shallow breathing? We may have the idea that shallower or gentle breathing is better or more advanced than heavier breathing, but that's not always the case. Listen to the needs of the body. It's in the listening that your mindfulness, alertness, and discernment develop and, acting together, bring the mind to a really solid concentration that can act as a basis for further wisdom, discernment, and insight to arise. You have to be willing to put in the effort, confident that the effort will pay off. What you give to the meditation is what makes all the difference. 3 levels of evaluation. September 29, 2009. 2 nights ago it was so hot that most of us were sitting outside to catch what little breeze there might be. Tonight it's so cold that we're closing the windows, and people are all bundled up. It's hard to find conditions that are just right in every way. The world seems to swing back and forth from one extreme to the other. It's pretty much the same way with our minds. We can go through swings of extreme enthusiasm and extreme laziness, days when everything seems to be going perfectly fine. You sit down and meditate, and the mind is very obedient, and then, not much longer after that, it goes totally wild, out of control. So you've got to learn how to bring it under control yourself. Learn how to moderate it. If you're going to gain a place of just right, it has to come from the path, this practice we're doing. As Ajahn Mun once said, it's normal that when the mind starts on the path it's going to go from one extreme to the other. But you've got to learn from the extremes to see how you can bring things back to the middle. And a good place to learn about this is at the breath. The texts say that there are 5 factors that go into the first jhana: directed thought, evaluation, singleness of preoccupation, pleasure, and rapture. Ajahn Lee makes a really useful observation about them, that the first 3, directed thought, evaluation, and singleness of preoccupation, are the causes. Those are the factors you can do, whereas the other 2 factors are results. So you focus on trying to keep the mind with one object. You direct it, say, to the breath. And the really important factor in all of this is evaluation, learning how to gain a sense of what's just right for the body, what kind of breathing is just right for the mind, what, when you're out of balance, can bring things back into balance. Experiment. If you breathed a little bit longer, what would the results be? Then, when you've tried long breathing for a while, you might try even longer. Or you might try shorter. Evaluation here involves 3 things. 1. Try to figure out what changes you can make. 2. Learn how to evaluate the results of those changes to see what's working well and what's not. Then 3. When things are going well, how do you make the most use of the sense of ease and rapture that can come when things are going well? To begin with, it's good to remember there are lots of ways you can conceive the breath, and they'll give you different ideas of what the possibilities are. If you think of the breath only as air pumping in and out of the lungs, there's just a limited range of possibilities. If you think of it more as breath energy, that widens the range because the breath energy can come in and out at any spot of the body and can permeate every part of the body. Ajahn Fuang once talked about the breath in the bones. Have you ever looked at the breath in your bones? There's also breath energy surrounding the body, like a cocoon. Is that cocoon of energy in good shape? Can you sense it? Some people can, some people can't right off. But as you get more and more sensitive to the breath energy in the body, you realize it is there, and you can tell when there's a rip or a tear in the breath energy surrounding the body. And you can think of healing it. So that's the first part of evaluation. Thinking of the breath in different ways to see which way is most helpful right now. You might think of what Ajahn Lee calls the upflowing breath, which is the breath coming up from the base of the spine up through the head and goes out the top of the head. Or you can think of it coming from the soles of your feet up to the top of the head, supporting the body so that you're not slouching down as you sit. Or you might find that the breath energy flowing up from the body is getting stuck in your head. Hakuin, the famous Zen monk, talks about suffering from Zen sickness. Basically it was breath energy getting stuck in his head. To counteract it, he'd visualize a ball of butter on the top of his head melting down over the body. That was how he brought the energy back down. You might also think of the breath energy coming in and out the palms of your hands or the soles of your feet. If there's a tightness or heaviness, say, in your chest, think of it flowing out your arms and out the palms of your hands. If There's a tension in your hips. Think of the energy flowing down through the hips and out the soles of your feet. In other words, this part of evaluation has to do with your ingenuity in conceiving the breath energy and what you can do with it. The next step is actually learning how to read the results of what you've done. Sometimes you can get stuck on very subtle breathing, which may seem very still, very relaxing, very calming, and you stick with it sometimes for days on end. What it can sometimes do, though, is to drain the energy in the body. Years ago, Yam Thiem, an old woman who had been studying with Ajahn Fuang, came to stay at the monastery. As we were sitting in meditation one evening, he called out to her. "You've been stuck on cool breathing now for weeks," he said. "It's not good for you cool breathing here," meaning a very subtle, very still, very relaxed level of breath. Sometimes it's good to breathe in a way that's relaxing, but other times you've got to find a way of breathing that's more energizing. You've got to learn how to read what your body needs. Ajahn Lee compares it to being a good parent. When your child cries, you know what the child needs. You learn how to read the cry, and you have different ways of dealing with the child, picking it up, walking around, giving it something to eat, putting it in a swing, whatever you sense is going to work. The more familiar you are with your child, the more you can read the cries. And the same with the breath. When things aren't going well with the body, you want to observe why they're not going well. Exactly what kind of not going well is this? Too much energy? Too little energy? Is the breath flowing up too much or down too much? Is the breath energy dead and lifeless? Or is it too scattered? Then try to think of ways of bringing it back into balance. Then, again, you read what you've got. Is it working? If it's not working, try something else. This also means, however, learning how to read how long you need to stick with something before you can evaluate the results. Sometimes you can tell immediately. You try a certain way of breathing and can know right away that it's not right for the body. Other times it takes a while. Back when I had migraines, I found that really deep, forceful breathing could be very helpful. It didn't feel comfortable at first, but after a while I began to notice that it really was having a good effect on the body. So I stuck with it until it had done its work, and then I let things relax. So sometimes you can't tell right away what's going to work and what's not. But this is one of the reasons why we sit and meditate so long, so that we'll have time to experiment. When you sense that the results are going the way you want, that's when you come to the third aspect of evaluation, which is how to make the most use of these good results, how to maintain them. Say there's a sense of ease and well-being in the middle of the chest. How do you maintain that ease and well-being? What way do you breathe? How do you adjust your breath so as to maintain that sense all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out? Once you can do that, how do you let that sense of ease spread through the different parts of the body? Where are the channels where it can spread? What kind of spreading forces things too much and spoils the whole effect? In other words, how much allowing is involved, and how much actually opening things up and consciously spreading do you need to do? These are questions only you can answer for yourself. No one else can answer them for you. So these are the three aspects of evaluation. You start with using your ingenuity and thinking of different ways of working with the breath and working with the mind, i.e., focusing on different parts of the body, noticing how much pressure you need to exert in order to keep the focus there, how much pressure is too much, how much pressure is not enough. Then you learn how to read the results of what you're doing, to read the situation you're starting out with, and to read when you're getting good results and when you're not. And then 3. When you do get good results, use your ingenuity to figure out what you can do with them. How you can maximize them so that the mind can stay still and balanced for a long period of time, how to keep the mind clear so that you can get the higher benefits of concentration, i.e., the discernment that can come when things are very clear in the mind. With a strong foundation of mindfulness and alertness, it's a lot easier to keep the breath in mind throughout the day when the breath feels really good. You can walk around and just be filled with a sense of just that fullness. When you do that, you find it a lot easier to stay centered in the body. The mind is not really interested in going off anywhere else. because it feels so gratified. So this factor of evaluation is the really important one in getting all the other factors of first jhana together. If you evaluate the breath in a way that makes it more comfortable and the sensation of the breathing more interesting, it's a lot easier to keep your mind focused on the breath and to stay there, to maintain a sense of singleness, which means both having one object in mind and then having that one object or that one perception fill the whole range of your awareness throughout the body and even around the body, including the cocoon of energy outside. The sign that your evaluation is going well is that the sense of fullness in the body becomes more and more pronounced, with a sense of ease, well-being, pleasure simply in being here with the breath, being here in the body, letting all the different breath channels in the body connect, so that everything in the body feels unified. All of this depends on how carefully you do this process of evaluation, how you bring your powers of observation to bear. Some people have said that the factor of evaluation is simply the wobbling of the mind, because your concentration isn't solid enough, but that's not really the case. You need to do this evaluation to get the mind and its objects snugly together, so that they're on good terms with each other. And as Ajahn Fuang would say, once things are just right, you reach the point where you realize you don't need to evaluate things anymore. The breath is just right coming in, just right going out, and you can't really improve it. His image is of a large water jar like they have in Thailand, where they collect the rainwater coming off the roofs of houses. He said you fill up the water jar, and it gets to the point where it's so full you can't really add any more. If you try adding more water, it just spills out. The jar can't get any more full than that. That's the point where you can let the evaluation go and just become one with the breath. The awareness fills the body, the breath fills the body. That sense of oneness can take you all the way to the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness. But to get to that, you've first got to evaluate things to get everything fitting snugly together and well connected together inside. I once made the mistake one time, when talking to someone in Thailand, of saying that it's like a dog lying down. I shouldn't have used a dog to make a comparison with the mind in concentration, but I thought it was a good image. The dog lies down, and oops, there's a rock. So he gets up and scratches away the rock. Then he lies down again. Oops, there's a root. Okay, he scratches at the root. And then when everything is smooth, he settles down. It's the same with the breath. You scratch here, you scratch there, and you finally get everything nice, smoothed out, and comfortable. Then the mind can really settle down and really be at one. It's this scratching around to make things just right and keep them just right. That's the evaluation. So try to do as precise and observant a job as you can with this evaluation, and the results will just keep getting better and better. Rapture. August 22, 2011. Take a few deep, long in and out breaths, and think of the breath energy filling the body. When we talk of the breath energy being full, it's not a matter of having your lungs stuffed with air. It's more that the energy channels throughout the body are open, and they feel saturated with comfortable energy. So try to notice where in the body you have that sense of fullness right now. Protect that spot as you breathe in, protect it as you breathe out. Don't squeeze it. Don't pull it. Think of it floating in mid-air right there. Some people feel this sense of potential fullness most easily in their hands. Other people feel it most easily in their chest. It really varies from person to person where you're going to feel it first. Once you notice that there's an area that does feel relatively full of nice energy, think of it spreading out from that spot. This is something you can't push or pull. You allow it to spread at its own rate. Tell yourself you're in no hurry. You don't have to anticipate how soon it's going to happen, how long it's going to take. It's something that happens right on the cusp of the present moment. So if you're leaning too much into the future, you're not going to see it. If you're leaning back into the past, you're not going to see it. Try to think of yourself being balanced right here. The image the Buddha gives is of a mustard seed on the tip of an awl, like an extremely sharp nail. Now, developing this sense of fullness, this sense of well-being, requires that you pay very careful attention to the breath, and that you be very meticulous in how you evaluate the breath. How is it feeling right now? When you breathe in, does the breath energy spread smoothly or does it feel like you're pushing or pulling it too much? What we're working on here is something that's called piti in Pali. You can translate it as rapture, you can translate it as fullness, you can translate it as refreshment. The basic meaning is that it feels really good, really nourishing. The Buddha lists it as one of the energizing factors of awakening. It's also a kind of food. There's that passage where he says that, when we meditate, we feed on rapture like the radiant gods. The problem with the word rapture is that sometimes it seems too intense for the way some people experience it. Some people feel it as a tingling through the body, their hair standing on end. For others, it's gentler, a sense of balanced full well-being. Some people feel it in waves coming over the body. And for some people it's so intense that the body starts moving. The intensity is not a measure of the intensity of your concentration. It's more a measure of how starved of energy the body's been feeling. If it's been feeling really starved, the sense of rapture is going to be extremely intense. If the body hasn't been starved, the rapture or refreshment will be more gentle. Sometimes you may want it to be intense, but it's not going to be intense, but that doesn't matter. Be very patient with it. Again, if you start pushing it too much, it withers up. Have a strong sense of allowing the energy to be there and to radiate out. If it's going to spread, it's going to spread at its own rate. You just try to maintain your balance right there on the cusp of the present, and it'll do its own thing. This is a really necessary part of meditation. Ajahn Fuang used to say that your mind is like a machine that needs lubricant. Otherwise it's going to dry up. Your practice gets dry if there's no sense of real refreshment and well-being. That's what rapture is. Lubricant for your meditation. He talked about being alone up in the forest for years in northern Thailand, missing Ajahn Lee. And what kept him going through the day each day was his ability to tap into a sense of rapture whenever he needed it. Realize that rapture is waiting here for you in the present moment. Just look very carefully and give it some space. In the beginning, it might not seem like much, but you've got to give it a chance. It's like that old fable of the mouse and the lion. The lion catches the mouse, but the mouse promises the lion that if he lets him go, maybe someday he'll save the lion's life. The lion is amused and so lets the mouse go. After a while, the lion is caught in a net, and the mouse comes and eats away at the net, freeing the lion. So don't disparage little things, don't disparage weak things because they can grow. They can get stronger. Wherever in the body there's a feeling of okay, allow it to stay okay. Protect it. Ajahn Fuang would use the word prakong, which means to hover around something to protect it. Try to develop that same attitude of hovering around these sensations in the body. Don't push them or squeeze them too much. Give them their space. Just protect them so that nothing comes in and steps on them. As for any questions the mind may have about how long this is going to take or how much longer we're going to be sitting here, just drop them, drop them, drop them. Let them fall away. Try to find a sense of balance right here, because right here is where all the good things happen and where all the important things happen as well. If you can nourish and protect this sense of fullness, then you begin to notice any movements of the mind that might disturb it. You see where the mind is hungry and how it often goes out to look for what's basically junk food to assuage its hunger. Now, however, you realize you don't have to do that, for you've got something really nice and nourishing right here. Why go out and look for trouble? Greed, aversion, and delusion are all looking for trouble. They're like strong attacks of hunger and they're never really satisfied. When you act on these things, they may provide a little bit of fullness and a little bit of energy, but then it goes. It's like food that's bad for your health. But here's something that you've been carrying around with you all the time. The potentials in the body. Ajahn Lee talks about this a lot, that the body has all kinds of potentials that we rarely take advantage of because we don't let the mind get quiet enough for them to show themselves. So give this potential for fullness, a sense of refreshment, some space, give it some time. You'll find that it really can strengthen your practice and give you a source of energy that you can tap into whenever you need it at any time throughout the day. Whether you're in formal meditation or not, these potentials are always there. When you can recognize them and learn how to allow them to grow, you'll have a constant source of food, a constant source of energy that you can take with you wherever you go. Truth. April 21, 2011. Ajahn Lee often made the point that our practice is a skill. The Dhamma is all about skill. The words are there to help us master this skill, to understand the problems we face in mastering this skill, and understand the various approaches we might take to solve those problems. But the words are not the Dhamma, the words point to the Dhamma. The genuine Dhamma is something we have to do. One of the old meanings of the word Dhamma is action. To see Dhamma in this sense, we have to look at our actions very directly, very carefully, to see where they're skillful and where they're not. This is why you see a lot of analogies to skills in both Ajahn Lee's teachings and in the Buddha's. The Buddha compared a skillful meditator to a skillful archer, cook, or carpenter. Ajahn Lee would say that as we develop directed thought and evaluation in the practice, it's basically learning how to observe our actions and their results, and to figure out what's going wrong. He would compare it to learning how to weave a basket, sew a shirt, or make clay tiles. Remember this as you're reading and listening to the Dhamma. The Dhamma isn't just a matter of understanding the words as you listen. Ajahn Lee once said that if you wanted to explain the Dhamma at the level of being able to remember the main points, it wouldn't take 3 hours. But then, taking just one of those points, it might take 3 years to really understand it as you put it into practice. So the Dhamma is not something to just memorize. It's something you actually have to do and observe. This is why the Buddha said that truthfulness is one of the primary requirements of practice. It involves 2 things. One is being honest about what you're actually doing and the results you're actually getting. The other meaning of truthfulness is sticking to something once you've made up your mind that it's what's really worthwhile to do. The 2 qualities go together. Once you've noticed that something seems clearly and truly good, then you stick with it without betraying your knowledge or your understanding, until you get the true results you're after. You have to be true in order to learn the truth. Then, you take that truth and continue to be true to really benefit from it. For a lot of us, the thought of honesty means being honest about our shortcomings. That's one side of honesty. It's a painful side. And there's another painful side. Being honest about our capabilities that we haven't fully developed. We could make more of ourselves. That was the honesty that drove the Buddha on this path. As a prince, he had power, wealth, and all kinds of sensual pleasures. According to traditional accounts, the people around him kept asking, "What more could you want? Think of all the great people in the past. This is how they lived their lives. Why can't you?" The Buddha responded, "That's a sign that they weren't really great or admirable. They weren't worthy of honor or respect. Truly great people are the ones who check to see if they have a greater capacity within themselves and explore that capacity by pushing the envelope." That's what the Buddha did, and that's why he found the Dhamma. He would look at his actions and ask himself, "Am I suffering?" When the answer was yes, the next question was, "What am I doing that might be causing that suffering?" He had to look honestly at what he was doing and the results that he was getting. Then he had to ask himself, "Is there an alternative way of doing this? Is this all a human being can do, or is there something better, something more?" He stretched his imagination and would try out any promising approaches to see if they actually worked. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha regarded truthfulness as the most important virtue, both in the sense of speaking truly and in the sense of not betraying your knowledge or your understanding. All the precepts come down to this quality of truthfulness. You observe that you've been harming people yourself or others and you want to stop, and then you make up your mind to stick with that determination. Precepts aren't commands. The Buddha is enforcing them on you. You have to see for yourself that it really would be better to give up harmful actions. It's a promise you make to yourself. Once you make it, you want to be true to that promise. If you start lying to yourself or betraying your knowledge, it sets up a long series of other ways you have to lie to yourself. It's the same when you lie to other people. You tell one lie and then you have to cover up that lie with another lie, then a third lie, and then a fourth. It gets very tricky and very complicated, for after a while you forget who you told which lie to. It's a lot simpler just to stick with the truth. Okay, I do have these shortcomings, but I also have these potentials. It's by being true that the potentials open up. The Buddha placed great emphasis on this virtue of truthfulness. It's one of the reasons why he said that people who feel no shame in telling a lie are capable of any kind of evil. This doesn't mean that everybody who lies is capable of all kinds of evil. There are people who will feel ashamed about the lies they tell, which shows that they know some boundaries, that they have a sense of right and wrong. The people who feel no shame at all are the ones you have to watch out for. It's especially troubling when you hear somebody say, "There are circumstances where a lie is perfectly acceptable." They'll give extreme examples where if you don't tell a lie, somebody might die. Then they turn it into a principle that lies can be okay in circumstances that are far less drastic. But even in the drastic cases, can you be sure that telling a lie will save the person's life? Some people are very poor liars. More importantly, what kind of person feels no shame in justifying the telling of a lie? A shameless person. If you feel that lying can be okay, then you're capable of any evil. So you want to make sure that you take refuge in the truth. Ajahn Mahabua once said that if you hold to what's true, then the truth holds no danger for you. When you pretend or make false assumptions, then the truth becomes a threat. When you begin to practice and look at where you're suffering, you notice certain things that you hold on to that cause you to be fearful and to feel threatened. Look into the truth of these assumptions. Is this really true? Is this really mine? These are cases where the perception of not self is crucial as a tool for letting go of the things that make you feel threatened by the truth. When you can let go of those things, the threat goes away. The result is that the more honest you are with yourself about your shortcomings and strengths, the better your sense of yourself. Atnuta is the Buddha's term for this. This takes time and requires truthfulness. Having a sense of yourself means knowing your strengths and weaknesses, the areas you have to fix and or improve, and also what areas or qualities of the mind you can depend on to make those improvements. To be honest with yourself and about yourself doesn't mean saying, "I'm miserable and I accept the fact. Maybe I can be okay with this." That's not what the Buddha asked for or recommended. He recommended knowing your strengths as well as your weaknesses. Make a clear evaluation here. The clearer you are about this, then the easier the path will become. The Buddha asked two things of a person who came to study with him. That the person be both observant and truthful. Those two qualities go together. The more truthful you are in general, the more you can begin to trust your observations as to what's true or what's not, what's worthwhile or what's not. In that way, the truth becomes your refuge. Your truthfulness becomes your refuge. Otherwise, how are you going to know what's skillful and what's not? How are you going to know whom you can trust and whom you can't? You have two basic sources of knowledge. What you gain from other people, and what you gain from yourself. Both have to be tested through the truthfulness in your own powers of observation, and in the thoroughness to which you put the teachings to a fair test. That's why the truth is your ultimate refuge. The truth of your own heart and mind. Ajahn Lee once said, "If you aren't true, then the Buddha's teachings won't be true for you, and you'll never know what the Buddha's teachings truly are." Turn that around. If you're true, then the Buddha's teachings will be true for you, and you do have a chance of knowing what they are. That's where honesty has its more than pleasant side. First, when you can say that you honestly want to learn the Dhamma, and then when you can honestly say that you know the Buddha's teachings about true happiness, the ultimate happiness, are true. Your mind is lying to you. September 15, 2010. There's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin's sitting on a sled at the top of the hill and he's thinking, "Go ahead, go down the hill, you won't run into that boulder, you won't run into that stream, it's not too steep." And in the last panel he turns and says to the reader, "My brain is trying to kill me." And that's one of the main problems in life. Your mind is trying to kill you. If not kill you physically, It's trying to kill your goodness, kill your possibility for really getting anywhere in the practice. Ajahn Mahabua talks about how when he was a young monk, he was afraid to go out and practice for fear that it would be wasted energy. There was a belief in those days that the time for jhana had passed, the time for nirvana had passed, and he was afraid any effort in that direction would be wasted. He got over the fear by realizing that whatever the Buddha taught was not meant to be an executioner of your happiness. Whatever's required of the path, whether it's easy, whether it's difficult, it's all good. And it's not that progress happens only when the path is easy or only when you're enjoying it. There's a sutta where the Buddha talks about how some things are good in the present, good in the future, good in the present, bad in the future, bad in the present, good in the future, bad in the present and bad in the future. The one that's bad in the present but good in the future, he says, is the case where a person is practicing the Dhamma, leading the holy life, thoroughly miserable, tears running down his cheeks, but he's willing to stick with it. In cases like that, the mind has lots of ways of pulling you away, and you have to watch out for them, learn how to catch the mind when it's lying to you. Sometimes it comes as psychotherapy, saying, forcing yourself is bad for you, you know. It's unhealthy and all the jargon that therapists have cooked up to keep people from exerting themselves, to keep them happy with a life that really is not worth being happy with. Like the therapist I was talking to up in Vancouver last year. He was working in a storefront that offers psychological counseling to drug addicts. And he was telling me that for years they had trouble just getting people to come in off the street for free therapy. They found the one approach that worked to at least pull the people into the storefront was to help them work on their self-esteem. But the problem was that they ended up with clients who had high self-esteem but were still on drugs. They were perfectly okay now with taking drugs, they didn't feel bad about themselves for taking drugs. And the therapist was beginning to realize that this was not an advance. It was actually a setback. There's a lot of that in psychotherapy. Therapists will tell you that there are a lot of fellow therapists who are afraid they're going to lose their clients, so they tell the clients whatever they think the clients want to hear. And because psychotherapy claims to be a science, it begins to sound scientific. So we have to watch out for that. People even use the Dhamma as a way of lying to themselves, using the wrong Dhamma at the wrong time. There's a classic case of that in the 4-volume novel, Joseph and His Brothers. Joseph has been working as a slave in charge of Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife has been trying to seduce him for an entire volume of the novel. And you think he's been able to steer clear of her, but then one day the whole family goes out for a holiday that requires everybody to go over to the west side of the river for ceremonies at the tombs. When they come back home, there's going to be a big dinner. And Potiphar's wife lets it be known that she's not feeling well, so she's going to stay home alone in the house. At first, Joseph goes over with the group to the west side of the river, but then he starts telling himself, gee, as a responsible steward here, I really ought to go check the arrangements back at the house. This is followed with a long series of little maxims that he repeats to himself to convince himself that that's his duty to go back. So, as a fool, he ends up going back and Potiphar's wife attacks him physically. He's able to get away, but she has his cloak in her hand. The evidence that he tried to rape her. It's because of that he has to go into prison all out of a false sense of duty. So you have to watch out for the voice in the mind that says, well, you'd really be better off, you've got this duty, you've got that duty. But is it genuinely your duty? That's one of the most seductive ways the mind has of lying to itself. This is why, when you meditate, you have to learn how to say no to every thought that comes up. It's your first line of defense. That means not just putting it aside but questioning it. Is that really true? Is that so? Is that so? You could ask. And then watch. Try to keep the mind in position with the breath or just with the sense of the body in the present moment, staying outside of your thought worlds. And remember the old principle, don't believe everything you think. Because it's very rarely that we fall for just raw desire. Desires have their reasons. This was an old problem in ancient philosophy. Plato said that reason and desire are two totally separate functions of the mind. But then the Stoics noticed that, no, if you can reason with your desires or reason can win out over desires, you're not winning out through sheer force. If desires actually listen to reason, it means they have reasons of their own. And often they won't tell you what their real reasons are. They're like politicians. They wave a flag over here so they can do their dirty work over there. If you really love yourself, really care for yourself, really want to put an end to suffering, you have to learn to recognize the red herrings, the distractions, the good-seeming reasons that are actually going to lead you astray. Often they're in terms of abstractions. This is one way you can recognize them. The Buddha didn't deal with abstractions. He dealt with actions, specific actions. This action, what is it going to lead to? That action, what is it going to lead to? Where does it end? If you get pulled off into abstractions, you get pulled further and further away from the actual mental act of seeing the connection between the action and the result. This is why a lot of meditation is a matter of staying under the radar. Abstractions are flying through the air, but you stay down close to the ground. Just watch. When I think in this way, what's the tone in the body? What's the tone in the mind? Where is this leading? Which of my defilements wants me to believe this? It's like that old way of protecting yourself when you're reading magazines or newspapers. Somebody wants me to believe this. Why? That way, you don't get entirely pulled in by a skewed way of thinking. This is one of the most valuable gifts of the practice. It gives you a place here with the breath where you can step back and watch your thought worlds in terms of cause and effect. This is how the Buddha himself said he got onto the path. After realizing that jhana was one of the factors of the path, he had to work on right resolve, i.e., training his mind to see what kind of thoughts lead toward concentration and what kind of thoughts lead away from concentration. In the same way, you look at your thoughts in terms of cause and effect. To what extent are they bringing the mind to a sense of well-being or ease? Of course, sometimes the path to that ease is going to be hard. The Buddha never said it's going to be easy all along the way. You have to keep an eye toward the long-term results of what you're doing. So the concentration, as you're working at it, develops a set of skills that enable you to gauge what's being said in the mind, so that you can figure out who's lying to you and who's telling the truth. Who has your best interests in mind and who doesn't? Remember that image of Ajahn Lees, of all kinds of beings, germs and whatnot in your bloodstream. A thought goes through your brain, and maybe it's the thought of one of those little beings going through the bloodstream around your brain. Thinking in this way reminds you that you don't have to identify with everything that comes up in the mind or gets lodged in the body as an emotion. I've been reading about the Romantics and the Transcendentalists, how they really had a strong respect for the mind's intuitions, and they gave them absolute authority. That's dangerous. You can't give absolute authority to anything. You have to test everything, and test the way you test things, and in the testing you try to develop the ability to judge more and more reliably. This is why we take refuge in the Buddha to begin with, because we need someone as an example, someone with whose example we can compare our thoughts or actions or our words, until we reach the point where we really can depend on ourselves. So if anything's pulling you away from the practice, remember, it's lying to you. And it's not going to present itself simply as raw desire. It's going to have its reasons, some of which sound very smooth and convincing. One of the skills you have to develop as a meditator is to learn how to see through that. One of Ajahn Fuang's traits that really struck me when I first met him was how skeptical he was. He wasn't willing to jump to conclusions, either believing or not believing. He'd watch and he'd watch some more and he'd watch some more. That's how to prevent even your insights from getting hijacked by your defilements. When an insight comes in, pride can arise around it, which is why Upasika Keenanayan always advised that whenever an insight comes, watch to see what happens next and what happens next, and then what happens next. Ajahn Lee's test would be: if you gain an insight, ask yourself, to what extent is what you just learned true? To what extent is its opposite true? It's this ability to step back and watch that's so important, so that ultimately you can see through to the truth. Encouraging perceptions. November 23, 2010. When we meditate, we're working with the process of perception. When we focus on the sensation of the breathing, we're also keeping in mind a particular perception of the breath, so that we know what to look for, where to look for the breath. For example, if you have a perception of breath simply as air coming in and out of the lungs, you're going to be looking in one place and seeing one kind of thing. If you change your perception and think of the breath as energy flow in the body, you're going to be looking other places, seeing other things. Perception is also used in gaining insight. Sometimes you hear that concentration basically deals with the perception or the mental label of something, whereas when you're developing insight you're dealing with the actual experience, but that's not the case. The two go together, the perception and the experience, both in concentration practice and in insight practice. When you're trying to concentrate, you use the perception of the breath to direct you to the experience of the breath, and to keep you there. When you're starting to develop a sense of dispassion, you use the perception of inconstancy, or the perception of stress, or the perception of not self. These are mental labels and you're applying them to things you're experiencing. One of the important lessons you learn from meditation is the power of perception, how it can shape your experience. What you sense in your world of experience, both inside the body and around you, where you're going to focus your attention and what you're going to do with it, your sense of your possibilities, of what can be done. Again, if you think of the breath as simply the air coming in and out of the lungs, there's a limited range of possibilities for what you can do. The idea of allowing the in and out breath to stop gets kind of scary. But if you think of the breath energy flowing throughout the body, extending out to all the pores, then the idea of the in and out breath stopping is not so scary. If you think of yourself as starved of breath, you have to keep gulping it in. You're going to breathe in a way that's not very conducive to getting the mind to settle down. But if you develop a perception of the body being filled with breath energy, then the in-breath is just connecting with what's already there, energizing what's already there, and you're going to breathe in a different way, with a lot less desperation, with a greater sense of fullness and ease. What's called the bodily fabrication aspect of the in and out breath has an impact on the movement of energy in the body and the way you feel the body is going. To get more and more subtle, more conducive to the mind settling down. All these perceptions are true to some extent, it's just that some of them are more useful than others, more beneficial, for some purposes and not for others. For the purpose of meditating, you want to hold on to a perception that's right for what you're doing right now. In this way, the perceptions you hold in the mind are a kind of mental chatter, a kind of inner speech, the words that go into the sentences of your directed thought and evaluation, and the same principles apply to inner speech as the Buddha applies to outer speech. In other words, before speaking, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is it true? There are all kinds of things that are true. So, the next question is it beneficial? Is it really good to say these things? Is it really good to hold these perceptions? What use do they have? What impact do they have on the mind? Even though they may be true, if they're not having a beneficial impact on the mind, you might want to let them go. But even if they're beneficial, the next question is this the right time and place for them? Is this the time for comforting perceptions, or is this the time for perceptions that crack the whip? The ones that say, hey, you've got to get to work. These are the sorts of things you learn through experience. But for the purposes of the meditation right now, you want to hold to a perception of the breath that allows the mind to settle down, so that it doesn't have to think a lot about breathing in, breathing out. You want perceptions that simply allow the breath to come in, allow it to go out. So, a perception of the ease of the breath, the fullness of the breath is very helpful. At the same time, you need some useful perceptions about your own mind. You have to be convinced that you can do this. As Ben, I'm a human being. They can do it, so can I. But sometimes you're fighting some perceptions you've carried over from the past that tend to undercut that kind of self-confidence. So again, this is a question. However true they may have been. Are they beneficial right now? No. So you've got to figure out ways to let them go. Ajahn Mun would do this with his students. He himself was the son of a peasant, most of his students were peasant sons, and peasants in Thailand are way down on the social ladder. The message coming out of Bangkok in those days was that if you wanted to get anywhere in the Buddha's teachings, you had to go to Bangkok and study with the experts there. Bangkok people from the royal family, people from educated backgrounds. If you're just a peasant son meditating out under the trees, what would you know? A lot of people in the countryside had internalized that message, so Ajahn Mun's first task was to counteract it. One of his frequent teachings was, what do you need in order to practice? You need a human birth. You've got that. You need the 32 parts of the body. Sometimes you don't have to have all 32 functioning properly, but you've got a human body and you've got a human mind. You've got what it takes. You see this repeated again and again in his teachings. He had to build up the confidence of his students, and yes, even though they were peasants and had had minimal education, they had enough. They had what it takes. This is why we have the wilderness tradition. They were able to overcome the messages that society had been sending to them. You need confidence in order to do this. One helpful perception is not to think of yourself as a unitary self, but as many selves. You've had many desires. Each desire has its own set of selves, the self that's going to gain the desired pleasure, and then the self that can manage things to produce that pleasure. Now, in many areas of life, we may not have many skills, in which case that second kind of self may be pretty underdeveloped. But you have to think about the fact that you do have some skills, there are some things that you do well, and so think of those as the strong members of your committee. Then learn to take the lessons they've learned in managing things skillfully and apply them to your meditation. This is a skill that requires time, requires patience, so that we can comprehend suffering, let go of its cause, develop the path, so that we can experience or verify for ourselves that there is a cessation to suffering. The hard part here is comprehending the pain, because pain, both physical and emotional, is something we tend to run away from. Who wants to sit around with pain long enough so you can comprehend it? So you need skills. You need strengthening factors. This is what the path is all about, from right view all the way down to right concentration. The factors of the path are there to strengthen you, to encourage you, to give you the skills you need to sit with suffering, sit with pain, and understand it. So, again, whatever perceptions, whatever ways of talking to yourself that are true but may not be beneficial, or may not be timely, you've got to learn how to drop them. Sometimes you have a big investment in them, and sometimes they've been drummed into your head so long you can't think of any other alternative. That's when you've got to remember that you do have skills, you do have abilities, so focus on those, build on your strengths. Again, don't perceive yourself just as a unitary being. You've got all these committee members in here, so try to figure out which ones are skillful, which ones are going to be helpful right now, and encourage them, so that you have the strength to look at your suffering. This is why we work so much on concentration, because the concentration develops a sense of ease, a sense of rapture, a sense of stability. It's nourishing for the mind, strengthening for the mind. There are also other objects of concentration beside the breath, meditation exercises that can be helpful when you need them. For example, reflection on your own generosity, reflection on your own virtue, recollection of the Sangha, remembering all those monks and nuns who went through a lot of difficulties. Some of them were on the verge of suicide, and yet they were able to pull themselves together and ultimately gain awakening. That's encouraging. They could do it, why can't you? Any of the contemplations that you find encouraging and strengthening, you've got to learn how to develop them. If there's a nagging voice in the back of the mind that says, well, that may be true of them, but it's not really true of me, you've got to recognize that voice for what it is, something that's unbeneficial, and only telling part of the truth, for a purpose you can't trust. You may have some weaknesses, but you've also got strengths. Don't let the cynic take over, because the cynic wants to destroy you. It doesn't want to practice. It's a member of the committee that you can't allow to have any power. You need to learn how to undermine its power so that it doesn't get in the way of the strengthening exercises that we do as we practice, as we meditate, as we develop mindfulness, alertness, concentration, and discernment. All these things are meant to help us comprehend suffering so that we can understand how it comes, how it goes, and realize where the cause is. There may be a lot of causes coming from outside, but the things that really harm us, that really hurt us, are the ways we cause ourselves to suffer. Sometimes that's hard to admit to yourself, but that's another reason why you need inner strength. So you can look at your own feelings and not get knocked off course by them, not get overwhelmed by them. It helps to realize that everybody does this, everybody's harming themselves, causing themselves suffering. The only people who aren't are arrogants. So we're all in this together. But we don't have to stay here. The sense of accomplishment that comes when the mind can settle down, the sense of ease that comes. These are all things that help you to step back, to look at the ways in which the unskillful members of your committee have been causing a lot of trouble. One of the uses of the not-self teaching is learning how to disidentify with these members, to watch them simply as patterns of behavior, old conversations, old movies, old habits that you haven't had a real chance to look at carefully, but now you can. You want to develop the imagination that helps you think of other ways of dealing with a particular problem so that you don't have to make yourself suffer. That's when you see that the type of behavior you're doing is causing yourself suffering, and also that it's not necessary. After all, it's just a type of action. It's not built into your essence. There are alternatives. When you see them, that's when you can really let go. This requires patience. It requires endurance. It requires self-confidence. Any perceptions that help in this project of giving you more strength are the ones you want to hold on to. Those are the ones you want to develop. That way you'll have the confidence that, like Ajahn Mun and Ajahn Mun's students, you can do it. 2. After all, they were human beings with a lot of strikes against them, but they were able to take to heart the fact that they were causing themselves to suffer, and that the path to the end of suffering was something everybody can follow. Those are good perceptions to keep in mind. In keeping with the Buddha's teachings, we underscore the profound significance of disseminating wisdom extensively. Today, we've converted this voluminous 1,000-page tome into an easily accessible audio format. Now, the responsibility to further this noble cause rests with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and content shares, you play a pivotal role in the widespread distribution of these teachings, benefiting countless others. Let's uphold the age-old tradition of sharing knowledge and fostering mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We invite you to join us in this mission, and together, we can create a profound impact on the lives of many.